"Oh, Snorri, you'll never understand," said Ogmundr. "I shouldn't have scared you like that. It won't help us. Come on, we're going to explore the woods today and try to find our way back home. Let me get these leaves off of you. All right, let's go."
"Great!"
exclaimed Snorro with excitement.
"But Ogmundr, I want milk." "Milk? Well, I'm not sure about that."
Ogmundr paused, but was interrupted by a startling sight. He looked towards the entrance of the cave and saw a pair of dark eyes glaring at him. It's not unreasonable to say that Ogmundr's heart stopped. His blood drained from his face, not because he was a coward, but because anyone, whether a boy or a man, would have felt frightened at that moment. What defines cowardice is cowering and losing the ability to defend oneself. Ogmundr instead stood up to the challenge. He put his arm around Snorro and faced the creature with a steady gaze. Upon seeing the creature as well, Snorro screamed and shut his eyes tight. The creature, however, wasn't fazed and pushed through the bushes. The savage grabbed Snorro's mouth to silence him, and Ogmundr used a thick branch to strike the savage's nose. This blow made the nose go from snub to Roman in an instant. The savage retaliated with a punch to Ogmundr's ear, leaving him dizzy. Ogmundr then attempted to understand the savage, but could not decipher their language. The savage gave him another smack to the other ear to emphasize his confusion. Snorro fell silent from terror and exhaustion. The savage was satisfied with his work and wasted no time in taking action. He wiped his nose, which had bled a little, then threw Snorro over his shoulder. He grabbed Ogmundr by the collar and pushed him forward, hastening his steps to leave the cavern. Poor Olaf had no idea where they were going, and his mind was consumed with fear. His thoughts raced as he imagined the worst possible outcomes. He knew that the savage's hatred toward him was intense, thanks to his recent assault on the savage's nose. Olaf feared that he and Snorro would end up being roasted and eaten, with added torture thrown in for good measure. And worst of all, his disobedience was to blame for their predicament. The thought was too much to bear. Olaf's only hope was to find a way to escape and lead his friends back to Snorro. He envisioned plunging a knife into the savage's groin, not for revenge, but to save Snorro. He considered a hand-to-hand struggle, but the grip on his neck was too strong. He even thought of leaving Snorro behind in a sudden race for freedom, but his conscience wouldn't allow it. Finally, he came up with a plan to make his escape and lead the rescue effort. He twisted his body, but it was no use. The savage punished him with a fierce kick that dashed his hopes. They journeyed through the woods, emerging into an open space beyond. Over ridges and into hollows, they traversed several forests. Poor Olaf wondered if they had entered another world beyond, his sturdy legs faltering under the strain. The noonday sun beat down on them, burning his brain. Eventually they came upon a rivulet and saw several conical tents made of skins emitting smoke. The savage emitted a low cry, answered by a band of native people approaching them. There were lots of excitement, gesticulation, and gesturing towards Olaf and Snorro, but they could not understand the intent. When they finally sat on the ground after much exhaustion, the guilt-ridden Olaf comforted Snorro as he sobbed. His conscience troubled him particularly because it was tender, and so it lashed at him without mercy. The natives inspected the children and led them to the tents where they served boiled fish and roast venison. Ogmundrand and Snorro promptly forgot their sorrows and wolfed down the food. Snorro was particularly famished since he had never experienced hunger before. Olaf, although more accustomed to hardships than Snorro, also ate with relish. After they had eaten their fill, the natives signaled them to stay in place and behave themselves. The natives packed up their tents and belongings and made their way downstream in canoes, moving swiftly and silently. Chapter 18. Anxious times, a search organized and vigorously carried out. The Norseman settlement was in a state of growing unease as word spread that little Snorro and Ogmundr were missing. At first, the news did not break all at once. Dame Gunhildr went about her daily tasks humming a tune, while Astrid and Berguna chatted while preparing Snorro's ration of milk, and Thorgunnar lit a fire in preparation for Snorro's return. Meanwhile, Frigga set about sewing a coat for Snorro's body, her stern demeanor melting in the presence of the child. As the sun began to set, Gunhildr grew restless. "I must go and meet them," she said to Berguna. They passed the spot where the little bear had been cut up and skinned, and saw Halfgrimr standing with Bolverk. Gunhildr asked, "Did you say that Ogmundr took the track of the woodcutters?" "Yes, that was where they started on their trek," replied Bolverk. "Are they not later than usual?" "A little. We'll go to meet them." But they did not find the children. As they walked back towards the settlement, Gunhildr became more and more worried. Suddenly she stopped and said, Bergunner, let us not waste time. If the dear children have strayed, men should be sent to search and shout for them immediately, before night-time falls. Back at the huts, Gunhildr called out for Svend, Halfgrimr, and Bolverk. The children must have lost their way. Hurry! Search for them before the sun goes down. Shout as you go. It will be impossible to find them after dark. If they have to spend the night in the woods, I'm afraid they will. Don't be afraid, Gunhildr, said Bolverk kindly. We will hurry and find them rambling in the thickets nearby for sure. Go, Halfgrimr, find Kjartan, and tell him that I will begin the search at once with Svend while he gets together a few men. Halfgrimr relayed the message to Kjartan, who quickly organized a group of men to search the woods in every direction, but their initial search was focused only on the woods near the settlement where it was believed Ogmundr may have lost his way. It wasn't until they extended their search further that they realized the urgency of the situation and the need for a thorough plan of action. Listen here, Halfgrimr, said Kjartan in a serious tone. This might take longer than we expected. Rush back to the huts and gather all the able-bodied men, except the home guards. They should be prepared to spend the night in the woods with a torch and at least one meal each. Don't forget the portions for the 20 men already out, added Halfgrimr. You're right, and tell them to meet me at Pine Ridge. If your legs are swifter than the wind, now is the time to use them, urged Kjartan. Without delay, Halfgrimr sprang off at a pace that impressed even the worried father. Within 30 minutes, Kjartan was joined at Pine Ridge by the whole strength of the colony. He organized search parties in all directions, specifying the territories to be searched, the limits, and the time and location for the next rendezvous. The next meeting point was going to be the same ridge where poor Ogmundr had vanished. Kjartan knew that it was his son's favorite place, and he intended to search meticulously up to it, hoping to find his boy near there. I am not as confident as you seem to be that Ogmundr has not gone beyond the ridge, Leif commented to Kjartan once all the men left them. Why do you say that? Kjartan asked. My son is an extremely trustworthy boy. I know who should be aware if not his own father, retorted Leif, but he is very immature. I have caught him giving in to temptation once or twice before. He might have done it again. I do not hope so, said Kjartan, but let's make a beeline for the ridge while the others carry on the search. We will soon learn if he has wandered to and beyond it. I know his favorite tree. Surely his tracks will lead us straight to him. As darkness began to set in, they lit their torches before starting. Here are the tracks, cried Kjartan after a quick search. Leif approached his mate, holding his torch. See, there is Olaf's footprint on that soft ground, Kjartan uttered while moving slowly with the torch held down. But Snorro's tiny feet are missing. Ogmundr always carried him. Yet, oh, here they are on this patch of sand. They stopped here, maybe to rest or change Snorro's position. I have lost track of them again. No, wait, here are Olaf's footprints only. He must have taken Snorro up again. Look over here, Leif called out, shifting slightly from his mate. Aren't those footprints descending from the ridge? Kjartan looked at them hastily. You're right, he cried, and they go towards the woods. Without a doubt, Ogmundr has broken his promise, but let's make sure. After a thorough search, both parents confirmed that the children had entered that part of the forest, rendering all search efforts in other directions pointless. Hastily, Kjartan reascended the ridge and blew a whistle. It was the signal that some of the investigation team had either discovered the children or stumbled upon their tracks. You'll need to give them another shout, reminded Leif. Kjartan did, and a faint and remote halloo echoed in response soon after. That's Bolverk, observed Kjartan, as they stood with bated breath. Hush, there is another. A third and fourth call followed in quick succession, confirming that the signal had been heard by all. Within a short time, the search party assembled at the designated rendezvous point, one after another. Did you find them? Was the first urgent question from everyone, followed by disappointment when the reply was no. But hope rose again when it was pointed out that the lost children must surely be somewhere in the dense woodland in front of them. The most experienced woodsmen shook their heads, knowing the vast darkness and depth of the forest would make any search challenging, if not impossible. Nevertheless, no one expressed feelings of despair, and they all agreed to continue the search all night by torchlight. After the plan was arranged, and another meeting point designated, they set out to search through the night in every copse and dell, bush and brake, and on every ridge and knoll that seemed even remotely possible for the lost children to have taken shelter. However, the forest was vast, and even a party 10 times their size would have found it nearly impossible to pass many hidden corners undetected. Thus, Although they were once or twice quite near the cave where the children were sleeping, they did not find it. Moreover, the ground at points was incredibly solid, and any faint tracks discovered were quickly lost. They shouted as they went, but their voices were as the faintest whispers to two such exhausted sleepers as Ogmundrand and Snorro. Gradually the search party wandered further and further away from the children until they were out of sight and hearing. Though the children were not capable of sight or hearing at the time, there was someone within the forest who was particularly alert to both. This was a scout from a party of natives who happened to be traveling in that vicinity at the time. The man, who had reddish-brown skin partially clothed in deerskin, gleaming black eyes, wiry black hair and long white teeth in excellent condition, had taken up residence for the night under a tree on the peak of a knoll. During his slumber, he became aware of a group of men wandering about the woods with blazing torches and shouting like madmen. He awoke from his sleep, not with any noise or commotion, but with the simple act of opening his saucer-like eyes until they were at their widest. As no harm came from this cautious approach, he dared to lift his head an inch off the ground, then another inch and another, until he was resting on his elbow and craning his neck over a low bush. As he was nearly invisible and silent with his dark skin and stealth, he seemed only an indiscernible shadow as he moved. Slowly he rose to his knees before standing upright and peering out into the expanse ahead. In the distance, Bolverk, Krumer, and a few others climbed the hill. It seemed natural for the shadow to sink back into a crouch, to lay on its belly, and then to slither into the thick bushes. It disappeared, but not before taking in all that was taking place. "Hey, Olaf! Snorro! Over here!" Bolverk's voice echoed across the summit of the hill. Krumer added his own voice, bellowing, "Huru!" It was a declaration that must have convinced the shadow that Krumer was a half-brother. "There's nothing here," Bolverk declared, while holding up a torch, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. "Absolutely nothing," Krumer confirmed. The shadow, from his vantage point, bared its teeth while loosening a long bone knife from its sheath. He could have launched it with unerring accuracy into the chest of Bolverk, or Krumer, or any of their companions. It was just as well that humans didn't always realize what they were up against. After surveying the knoll, Bolverk and Krumer went back into the bushes and continued on their way. The shadow rose and followed until he reached a height from which he could see the torch-bearers wandering to the west. His friends and relatives were encamped eastward, so he returned to his tree and slept until daybreak. As he stood up, he yawned and scratched his head, pondering the events of the night. If so many strange men searched for something with such fervor, it had to be valuable. Acting on this thought, he began to search. As most people know, savages are quite adept at making observations and drawing conclusions. The shouts led him to believe that individuals were lost. Daybreak allowed him to see tiny footprints that were hidden by darkness, which suggested that children were missing. With his incredible ability to follow trails, he found the cave and spied on the slumbering kids. His observation led to an altercation, but it also enabled the children to be reunited with their worried parents. After sunrise, the various search parties regrouped. The men, all of whom were weary and hungry, met up at their meeting spot. "Come on, lads," Kjartan said. "We mustn't give up so soon. Let's have breakfast and then return to the ridge where we first saw their footsteps. The daylight should make tracking them easier. Thank God it's warm, and they may not have been exposed for an extended period. The dear children have not been fasting for very long, so let's get to work." Leif and Bolverk supported Kjartan's strategy, and their demeanor and motivation boosted the morale of the group. After quickly eating, the men felt refreshed and ready to continue their mission. As the sun beat down on their tired bodies, Leif and Kjartan returned to the ridge, filled with renewed determination to find the missing children. Daylight illuminated the little footsteps with more clarity now, and in the afternoon they discovered the cave where the children slept. Leif and Kjartan examined every nook and cranny of the cave. "This is where they spent the night," said Leif, his voice full of intense interest. "They are gone," observed Kjartan, his heart heavy with worry. "We cannot afford to waste any more time. Bolverk, gather the men and let them spread out. Wait a moment. Is this not the foot of a man who wears a different type of shoe from ours?" he questioned as he held up a shoe. "It belongs to a savage," cried Bolverk, his voice tinged with unease. Ignoring Bolverk's words, the group now concentrated, following the clear prints of the children's shoes with unrelenting determination. "Without a doubt, they have been abducted by a savage," said Leif with absolute certainty. "Yes, "And that savage must have taken Snorro on his shoulder and made poor Olaf walk beside him," added Bolverk, his voice heavy with emotion. Following the trail like bloodhounds, they finally arrived at a deserted encampment by the riverbank. The embers of the fires still glowed, indicating that they'd been abandoned only a short while ago. The group searched the place, turning up the unmistakable little footprints of the children, different from the native children's prints due to the variance of their shoes. Suddenly they came upon marks that showed canoes had been launched. The countenances of Leif and Kjartan fell for the first time then. "Do you think there is no hope?" asked Kjartan, his voice filled with despair. Leif replied, "I won't say that, but we do not know which direction they have taken, nor can we follow them on foot." Kjartan responded in defeat. "That's true." Just then Hervor stepped forward, offering encouragement. "You know we have canoes captured from the savages. Some of us have become quite proficient at managing them. Let us go back and retrieve them, carrying everything we need to embark on a long journey. They can't have gone too far, and we'll surely catch up with them. We may lack experience, but our strong arms and wills will make up for that." Kjartan smiled sadly, acknowledging the sound advice. "You are wise, Hervor. Halfgrimr and you must hurry back to the huts to make all necessary preparations. Some of us will follow in your tracks more leisurely, and others will stay here to rest until you return with the canoes." The brothers mustered their speed, so when their comrades returned to the settlement footsore and weary, there was already a feast prepared, and everything was ready for them to depart. The home guard readied themselves for service, and before nightfall, the brothers had a new team. Carrying 3 canoes and provisions on their shoulders and their path illuminated by torchlight, the men set out with hearts full of determination to claim back the missing children. The encampment was alive with activity as Kjartan, Thorkel, and Hervor prepared to go on the quest with their trusted companions Krumr, Tricker, and Halfgrimr manning the bow. 24 strong men, each armed to the hilt with bow and arrow, sword and shield, and provisions for the long haul, made up their party. As they made their final preparations at dawn, Kjartan turned to those who had come to bid them farewell. "Rest assured," he said, "that we will either rescue the children or perish in the attempt. Leif and Bolverk will manage the settlement in our absence. They are good men, and I have faith in their guidance. If I do not return, tell Gunhildr that my last thoughts will be of her. But I have faith that we will be successful. The God of the Christians is with us." The Norsemen on the bank waved their farewells as the canoes took to the stream. Within minutes, they were on the great river, heading upstream into the heart of the wilderness. The party was lost to view, swallowed up by the vastness of the unknown. Chapter 19. New experiences, difficulties encountered and overcome. Thorkel and Tricker make a joint effort with humbling results. The Norsemen were not completely oblivious to the path of the great river on which they now embarked. During their stay in those lands, they had dispatched numerous exploration parties, and had a fairly good understanding of the area within 50 miles in all directions. However, most of these expeditions were conducted on land, with only one of them taking to the water. This particular voyage involved a lone canoe, navigated by 4 men, with Hervor as the helmsman and Halfgrimr at the bow paddle. They had proven themselves to be the most skilled at paddling and maneuvering the canoe among the group. During a skirmish with savages, they observed that the person at the bow was just as crucial to steer the canoe as the person at the stern. Later, when they had to navigate through rapids, currents, and eddies, they realized that steering from one end of the canoe was insufficient. They had to control both ends of the canoe to avoid stones, whirlpools, and dangerous chutes. To accomplish this, the helmsman had to submerge the paddle as far as possible on one side to steer the stern in that direction, while the bowman did the same on the opposite side, drawing the bow toward the other way, causing the canoe to revolve quickly. The 2 guide men had to work together to achieve safe and effective steering. The canoes confiscated from the savages were fragile in the most literal sense. They were made of birch tree bark, and although they were resilient, they were prone to tearing, as a single brush against a stone could create a significant leak. Therefore, they had to handle these canoes with the utmost care. But because they could quickly be repaired or reconstructed from nearby woodland resources, they made for excellent transportation. Although Hervor and her brother were proficient, the same couldn't be said for the crew managing the other canoes. Kjartan and his bowman Krumr had some experience, having practiced with the Scottish brothers, but Thorkel was a terrible canoeman. Despite his self-confidence as an accomplished seaman, he stubbornly insisted on serving as one of the canoe's helmsmen. Unfortunately, his bowman, Tricker, was the worst of the group when it came to rough waters, while displaying adequate skill on still waters. Their powers were untested yet, as the river was free of rapids, making their journey much easier. The scenery was abundant and stunning. In one part, the river flowed between high banks that were covered in trees and bushes of different colors. The colors were vibrant, and the scenery was awe-inspiring. In another part, the banks were lower and had lawns with little openings where rivulets met the river. These openings allowed for views into the woodland, where deer occasionally played. The river widened outwards into a lake occasionally, with wooded islets in the middle. Everywhere they looked, the water, land, and air were filled with animal life-fish, flesh, fowl, and insects. It was as though God's magnificent earth was still around, and anyone who left civilization behind could witness the vast wildernesses that still exist in North America. The Norsemen could not appreciate the sight fully as they were preoccupied with anxiety about the children missing. Their worry oppressed them. However, they could not help but admire the scenery now and then as they hurried along. As night fell, they reached the area where the natives had camped the night before. The Norsemen searched the campsite, examining everything, stirring embers, searching for little footprints while admiring Halfgrimr's unerring bow, which supplied them with fresh venison and wild geese. As they cooked their meals and ate around the campfires that night, they discussed their prospects. Kjartan, lost in thought, stared at the fire burning as he lay on a couch made of pine branches. He stated, "They have got but a short start of us, and if we push on with vigor, giving ourselves only just sufficient repose to keep up our strength, we are sure to overtake them in a day or two." Thorkel, however, disagreed, shaking his head doubtfully. He had a critical mind and expressed his views openly, for which he received criticism. Thorkel was a sensible adviser, although not a pleasing one. He tended to view things critically to conceal the negative consequences of acting with an overly positive outlook. It would have been better for him sometimes to keep his opinions to himself. Kjartan, on the other hand, appreciated and comprehended Thorkel's point of view. He responded with a gentle smile, "A stern chase is usually a long one. Nonetheless, we are not far behind, and that is what I count on for shortening the chase." Thorkel took a moment to savor the marrow bone, relishing its semi-liquid fat as if it were a fine wine. "That is a just remark," he said, finally addressing his hunting companion, "but I think you might make it a still shorter chase if you would take my advice. Ho, Crummer, hand me another marrow bone. It seems to me that Vinland deer have a peculiar sweetness, which is not so obvious in those of Norway, though maybe it is hunger which gives the relish. And yet can I truly say that I have been hungered in Norway? However, I don't care to investigate reasons too closely while I am engaged in the actual practice of consumption." He greedily sucked out the contents of the bone, thoroughly enjoying the taste. "And what may your advice be?" asked his friend, chuckling. "I'll wager that Halfgrimr could tell you if his mouth were not too full," replied Thorkel, smiling. "Tell me, thrall, before refilling that capacious cavern, what should we do to increase our speed?" Halfgrimr paused, interrupted mid-bite of a piece of wild fowl. After a moment of contemplation, he suggested that lightening the load of the canoe was the best solution. "And say," continued Thorkel, devouring a large drumstick, "how may that be done?" "By leaving our provisions behind," answered Halfgrimr. "Ha! Did I not say that he could tell you?" growled Thorkel, savouring the sinewy power of the drumstick. "There is something in that," remarked Kjartan. "Something in it!" exclaimed Thorkel, taking a break from his meal to wash it all down with a cataract of water. "Why, there is everything in it. Who ever heard of a man running a race with a full stomach, much less winning it? If we want to win, we must travel light. Besides, what need is there to carry salted salmon and dried flesh with us when the woods are swarming with such creatures, and when we have a man in our company who can bring down a magpie on the wing?" "That's true, if anything ever was," observed Crummer, who had been too busy to contribute to the conversation until now. Halfgrimr nodded in agreement, and Kjartan decided to implement the advice the next day. "Just take very little salmon," suggested Tricker, for fear that this good fortune might suddenly come to an end. Everyone laughed at Tricker's caution. Kjartan invited him to fill his own pockets with salmon for personal use if he wanted, but insisted on lightening the load. "Sure, it would be much better," joked Krumar, "to eat a week's allowance all at once and save time and trouble." "If I had your stomach, Krumar, I might try that," retorted Tricker, "but mine is not big enough." "Well now," countered Krumar, "if you keep overeating for a week or two, like you're doing now, You'll find yours is big enough and more. We must sleep tonight and not talk, said Kjartan, sensing the discussion was going to escalate. Come, get some rest. I'll awaken you in 2 hours. Every member of the expedition fell asleep quickly, except the leader, who was to watch for the first half-hour. Thorkel, Hervor, and Hafgrimr were assigned to take turns relieving the leader. The moon illuminated the sky when 2 hours elapsed, which was fortunate since they were about to reach the rapids, and ascending them required adequate light. Unfortunately, due to heavy downpours the past few days, the current was exceedingly strong, making it impossible to arrive at the rapids until the sun had risen. Before embarking on their journey, they buried all their provisions securely so that they could be used on the return journey if necessary. "It's a relief that we have daylight," remarked Kjartan as he, Thorkel, and Hafgrimr stood at the rocky bank beneath the rapids, surveying the place before attempting the climb. It was apparent that Thorkel's face expressed unusual symptoms of feeling as he gazed up the river, viewing nothing but churning waves colliding violently against sharp stones. One moment, the rocks appeared to be grinning like black teeth amidst the white foam, while the next, they were devoured by the swelling billows. "Do you mean that we have to ascend this maelstrom?" Thorkel asked, pointing to the river and looking at Hafgrimr. "On. I wish there was another way," replied Hafgrimr, smiling. "But in truth, I'm not aware of any. The canoes are lightweight and could be transported by land to the still water above the rapids. But, as you can see, the banks here are so steep that even a crow cannot find a foothold. If we attempt to go around through the woods on either side, we will have to travel 10 miles through a terrain so rough that the canoes will be destroyed before we complete the journey." "Have you and Hervor ascended that crazy stream before?" Thorkel queried. "Yes, twice," replied Hafgrimr. "Without capsizing?" inquired Thorkel. "Without capsizing," responded Hafgrimr. Thorkel directed a long silent gaze at the river, and his expression was one of surprise that was so entertaining that Kjartan momentarily forgot the anxiety that gripped him and burst into laughter. "You have nothing to laugh about," Thorkel stated seriously. "It's simple to talk about seamanship, and I assure you that if you provide me with a good boat and sturdy oars, and take me to the harshest sea you've ever seen, I'll demonstrate my expertise. However, has anyone ever heard of someone sailing on a monstrous kettle of boiling water in an eggshell?" "Hafgrimr claims to have done it," Kjartan interjected. "I will only believe it when I see it," responded Thorkel resolutely. "Do you object to following me if I lead the way?" inquired Hafgrimr. "Enough, slave. Do you think I'm afraid?" Thorkel snapped, and then, as if considering such conversation trivial, turned around lightly and was about to descend the riverbank to join the other men near the canoes, when Kjartan called him back. "Thorkel, slow down. We may be valiant sailors, and any man who dares to deny it will regret it, but we must set our pride aside and listen to Hafgrimr. Wise men can learn from anyone, even from thralls. If we're not wise enough for that, then we have no place as sea kings." "I'm all ears," Thorkel replied. Hafgrimr pointed to a large rock in the middle of the stream. "That's the course you must take if you want to make it through the rapid without getting soaked. See the largest rock where the foam breaks most fiercely? That's our first stop. Follow my finger, and you'll see 2 smaller rocks near the foot of the rapid. They have eddies or tails of smooth water below them. Can you see them?" "I can see them," said Thorkel, grudgingly interested. "But calling that smooth and a tail, I hope I never get caught by whatever smooth animal that belongs to. Compared to the rest of the rapid, it's smooth, and it has backdraft, which will allow us to rest there for a bit. The stone above it also has a tail that reaches down to the head of the tail below. You need to make a bold move towards the rapid so that you can reach the lower eddy. Rest there for a moment, but keep paddling, or you'll be carried down again. Then paddle for your life to get to the eddy above. You'll end up advancing about 30 yards and will be in a position to make a dash for the long eddy that stretches from the big rock." "That's straightforward enough," said Thorkel. "But wouldn't it be better for us to watch while you go first, so that we can learn from seeing?" "I'm game," Hafgrimr replied, feeling slightly offended by Thorkel's tone. "Thorkel has a point," Kjartan agreed. "Take your canoe and we'll observe from here. If it all goes well, we'll follow." Hafgrimr jumped down the bank, and in a few minutes his canoe, with 6 men and Hervor steering, fought its way toward the rapid. Thorkel became serious as he stood beside Kjartan on the cliff, watching the small vessel bobbing about on the tumultuous waters below. In a moment it reached the foot of the swirling water. Above the roar of the stream, Hervor's voice rang out, shouting as he urged his men on. The canoe seemed to stay put despite the men putting in all their effort. "It's too much for them!" Thorkel cried out, feeling anxious. "No, they're advancing!" Kjartan declared in a deep and serious tone. Their progress was slow, but steady. Gradually they conquered the power of the rushing stream and entered the first eddy, with their comrades on shore cheering wildly. They only paused for a moment before making a daring move towards the second eddy. The men on shore groaned in disappointment as the canoe sped down the rapid, seemingly undoing all their hard work. Suddenly, the canoe was caught by the extreme end of the eddy, jolting to a stop and turning straight upstream. The men paddled with ease towards the second rock. Once there, they paused briefly before lunging for the next eddy below the large rock. It proved to be easier to gain, but the water turbulence was so strong that crossing between the eddies was more dangerous than before. When they reached the large rock, they took a few moments to rest under it, before dashing back into the current. Yard by yard, they took advantage of every rock and eddy, slowly overcoming the challenge. Finally, they landed safely at the head of the rapids, triumphantly waving their caps to their friends below. "Oh, how Krumar wishes he was here!" exclaimed one of their comrades, Krumar, wiping sweat from his forehead and taking deep breaths. The sight of the struggle had excited him almost as if he had been the one paddling. "Krumar will soon be here if all goes well," retorted Kjartan, laughing as he stepped forward and ordered his canoe to be pushed off. "Thorkel, you go first. If anything happens, I'm here to help." "All right, lads," Thorkel called out. "Tricker, get in the front and do your best. A lot depends on you." He whispered the last words under his breath, as he was a self-reliant man who preferred to handle everything on his own. "Let's go." The canoe launched from the bank and headed straight for the rapid. Thorkel's shouting was deafening, even surpassing Hervar's when she took the rapid earlier. If lung power alone could do it, he might have taken the canoe up single-handedly, as he bellowed like a bull of Bashan when Tricker missed a stroke of his paddle, causing the bow to swerve and the canoe to drift backward. Thorkel let out another roar when they faced the rapid for the second time. The men struggled with all their might, and Tricker was determined to make up for his previous error. However, his anxiety got the best of him, and he missed another stroke, nearly falling overboard. It's often said that fortune favors the brave, and it certainly did this time. Tricker wasn't lacking in bravery, just experience and composure, but his missed stroke was a blessing in disguise. If he hadn't missed the stroke, their canoe would have ended up going in the opposite direction from the last time. However, the missed stroke allowed the canoe to veer into the first eddy, transforming Thorkel's furious roar into a thunderous cheer. After resting for a brief moment, Hervar and his crew resumed their journey through the turbulent waters. Thorkel, at the helm of his canoe, expertly navigated the stream, ensuring they were heading toward the appropriate angle. Tricker, however, was not as skilled and mistakenly believed they were pointed too far upstream. In a sudden stroke, he sent the canoe careening in the wrong direction. The vessel was flung into the wild surges beyond the eddy, where it was tossed from side to side like a toy. The canoe spun around and around until it was hurtling towards a rocky ridge, protected by layers of dangerous foam. Yet, as luck would have it, they skimmed over the ridge and made it safely to the other side. The canoe overturned, and the men found themselves floundering in the water, while the vessel rushed downstream. Foreseeing this possibility, Kjartan had been prepared. He had instructed his crew to remove all arms from Thorkel's canoe, intending to transport them on his own vessel. Then Kjartan and his team launched their canoe to rescue their friends, intercepting them before they could get too close to the treacherous shallows. Thorkel was annoyed by the setback, but Kjartan took it in stride. He playfully joked about Tricker's poor navigation, claiming he would have assigned a more capable crew member if he had known. Tricker, feeling ashamed, stayed clear of the group, not wishing to be a source of attention or ridicule. Kjartan then took his turn leading the way, promising that once they reached the top, Hervar would take the bow of Thorkel's canoe. He and Krumar, a more experienced member of their group, deftly maneuvered their way through the rapids. When they reached the top, Halfgrimr and Hervar were instructed to unload their canoe and joined them in a full crew to assist their friends. Kjartan went with them, ready to take over as steersman when Hervar switched to being Thorkel's bowman. With a renewed sense of determination and teamwork, the three canoes successfully navigated the rapids and moved on to the calmer waters ahead. Kjartan knew they had lost valuable time with their previous mishap, and made a mental note to push forward with renewed diligence and hard work. Chapter 20. Remarkable experiences of Ogmundr and Snorro. The former suffers the pangs of remorse. In many ways, a savage camp is truly unappealing. It could even be considered repulsive in many ways. The odors alone are enough to repel the senses, not to mention the repugnant dishes and unpleasant sights that the eyes must endure. The sounds are equally abhorrent, and the habits of the people are disagreeable to their visitors. That being said, there is something captivating about such a place. Students of nature, philosophers, anthropologists, philanthropists, and even cynics could all find something of interest there. There is much to discover and explore in such a camp. This is especially true for Ogmundr and Snorro, who happened to be prisoners of war in one of these savage camps. The particular camp they were in was the main headquarters of a savage tribe, housing hundreds of people at any given time. It was not a stationary camp, but rather a moving village of wigwams, set up without any particular order on the edge of what appeared to be a small lake, but was actually just a wide spot in the great river. Ogmundr and Snorro were brought to this camp by their captors and taken immediately to the tent of the chief. The chief, an elderly but strong-boned savage with white hair, was named Whitepow. He was struck by the sight of these two Norsemen and stared at them, almost unblinkingly, for 5 full minutes before saying a word. Snorro was uncomfortable with the intense stare of the chief, and crept close to Olaf's side. However, he found himself unable to look away, as if Whitepow had cast a spell on him. Finally, the chief spoke to the savage who had brought the children into his presence. The savage rapidly recounted the circumstances surrounding their capture, and then Whitepow turned to Ogmundr and asked him a question that sounded like, "Wardicum frojul itilsinner?" Ogmundrand did not understand the words and told Whitepow so. The chief repeated himself, but still Ogmundr could not understand what he was saying. With that, the interview was concluded, and Whitepow ordered for the children to be taken to a tent with several old and young women. We can only speculate what message was given to these women, as Ogmundr was unable to understand. They were surrounded by a sea of exotic faces, eyes trained on them in wonder and curiosity. The captive children were the new attraction of the tribe, eagerly seized and pulled into the center of the group. They were hugged, kissed, and handled like dolls, with their fair hair and strange clothes being scrutinized by every pair of eyes. The women were particularly fascinated by their white skins, examining them closely and even venturing underneath to examine every inch. The chatter and giggles were constant, and Olaf was addressed a couple of times, although Ogmundr shook his head and insisted that their words were gibberish. Despite the onslaught of attention and affection, the children remained composed. They were not old enough to be perturbed by the dirtiness of their surroundings, nor too jaded to appreciate the kindness of strangers. Gradually the captors gave way to a more practical need, and a young and not unattractive woman doled out milk to Snorro, in a gesture of kindness that completely swayed him. Olaf was less easily won over, but was placated enough by the offer of dried berries and a friendly smile from an old lady. However, the scrutiny of the whole tribe was yet to come. The children were led outside and perched on a piece of wood for a further inspection that lasted an hour. It was a more trying situation, but they endured it without protest. Finally, they were permitted to play with the boys of the tribe, although Ogmundr did not participate, wary of losing sight of the child he was responsible for. As they watched the boys with painted faces and feathered heads cavort, one of them came closer. His name, Powlett, was lost in translation, as was his intent to apply red paint on Olaf's face. The boy was already adorned with black, red, white, and blue patches, and even his hair had feathers in it. Ogmundr declined to be painted, but Snorro was tickled by Powlett's antics, bursting into laughter that echoed around the tribe. Olaf was brought to the verge of tears by Snorro's laughter. He held on tighter to the child, feeling that they had to stick together against this strange, inhospitable world. Powlett wanted to impress his peers with his skills, so he applied a streak of red paint beneath each eye. This caused Snorro to burst into uncontrollable laughter, prompting the other boys to gather around and join in on the fun. Powlett then offered to paint Snorro in the same fashion, but Snorro declined, pointing to his protector instead. Without hesitation, Powlett smeared a thick stroke of red paint from Olaf's forehead down to his nose, ending in a large round spot. The boys erupted with excitement, and Ogmund immediately invited further decoration. Powlett was up for the challenge and continued to paint Olaf's face, incorporating white and blue diamond shapes, circles beneath eyes, and lines that indicated amazement. He even stuck feathers in Olaf's hair. The boys shouted with joy, and Snorro could not contain himself, nearly falling off Ogmund's knee in a fit of laughter. However, their celebration was cut short when a towering native charged out of the chief's tent in a fit of rage, heading towards the boys. The boys immediately fled, and the savage singled out Powlett, attacking and then tossing him into the river. As Powlett emerged from the water and ran into the woods, Ogmund scooped up Snorro and walked away. As they continued down the river's bank, Snorro drifted off to sleep while Ogmund fell into deep thought, thinking of home and feeling downcast. Finally he groaned and wondered aloud, "What should I do?" As he looked around the dense and intimidating woods, the thought suddenly struck him that he could run away. The savages were not paying attention, so what was stopping him? He had been lost before and had survived. Why not try his luck once again? With this idea permeating his mind, he cast a cautious glance in every direction. Not a soul in sight. Encouraged by this, he tiptoed off the trail and into the thick woods. He searched for an isolated spot, and after some wandering he found it. Wild with determination and ignoring the fear gnawing at his heart, he bolted forward as fast as he could. Suddenly, he was startled by a loud guffaw from the bushes in front of him. He came to a sudden halt as Powlett popped out from behind the shrubbery, laughing in amusement at his hasty retreat. Poor Ogmunder immediately realized that the boy had been ordered to keep an eye on him. He spun around, his heart heavy with anger and disappointment, and marched back to the river. He found a secluded spit of land and carefully assessed his surroundings before sitting down to introspect. He berated himself for his foolishness. "Why did I break my promise?" he pondered sullenly. In a moment of candor he began to speak aloud to himself. "It's all because of disobedience. My father would say, 'If you love me, obey me. If you love Gunhildr, obey her.' That's the problem, Olaf. The sin lies there. He warned me never to cross the ridge, and I did. Due to that disobedience, here we are stranded, Sorny and I. We are likely to remain here forever. Oh, how I wish I hadn't done it. But what good can wishing do us now? If I had loved my father more, maybe I would have obeyed him better." It appeared as though Ogmunder had heard that word before. "If you love me, keep my commandments." After a few moments of contemplation he spoke again. "Yes, I know I did not mean to disobey, but I did it anyway. I didn't think of the horrendous consequences that would follow, but that's no excuse. What should I do now? Snorri, I would gladly give my life if only I could restore you to your mother." Snorri remained sound asleep on Ogmunder's shoulder, oblivious to his guardian's heart-rending statements. Ogmunder realized that it was time for the child to sleep. He returned to the women's tent, where he was greeted warmly. Soon Snorri was nestled on a pillow of rabbit fur, and Ogmunder lay beside him on a bed of deerskin. As he gazed upwards, the roof of the tent providing a glimpse of the sky, he couldn't help but think, "Why did I disobey? Why did I do it?" The question lingered in his mind, haunting him until his thoughts were consumed by sleep, and he sunk into oblivion at last. Chapter 21. Reinforcements sent off to Kjartan foes discovered in the woods, a night attack and other warlike matters. We must turn our attention back to the Norse settlement, now known as Leifsgard. From Thorkel's house, an all-too-familiar sound could be heard. Frigja's shrill voice could be heard weaving through the air like a gust of wind. She had a peculiar talent for monopolizing all the air around her, leaving nothing for anyone else, all while taking out her frustrations on some unfortunate soul. Bergunnar was usually the target of Frigja's wrath, the designated practice dummy for her outbursts. "Don't you dare tell me you can't help it!" Frigja screeched at Bergunnar. "You're always crying morning, noon, and night. I'm so tired of you. If I could, I would ship you back to Greenland tomorrow. If the ship went down with you on it, I'd celebrate. I really would. So don't say you can't stop crying. Don't do it. Do you hear me?" "Please, I can't," Bergunnar began, but she was cut off. "I knew you would," Frigja cried as she lifted herself up from the washtub. She seemed like she was tearing Bergunnar's clothes apart. "Why can't you? It's not easy to stop crying." Bergunnar whimpered, trying to spin thread and calm her tears. "Especially when I think of Snorro and—" "Crying? That's not crying," Frigja scoffed, diving into the tub. "That's just blubbering like a baby. Your face is all swollen up." It was true. Bergunnar's swelled eyes and cheeks betrayed her emotions, the pain of losing Snorro mixing with Frigja's incessant bullying to rattle her spirit. Silence was her refuge, but it only seemed to make things worse. Frigja was always ready to stir up more trouble. "What were you going to say?" "Poor what?" Frigja asked, breaking the silence with a sharp edge. "I was going to say poor Snorro, and—" Bergunnar replied. "Oh, don't even try to put it on Snorro," Frigja interrupted.
You were already crying before he was lost. You're thinking about Halfgrimr. You're too silly for him, even though he's just a thrall. Leave me be until you can stop your crying."
Frigga punctuated her orders by throwing a soapy rag at Bergunnar as she retreated. The cloth missed Bergunnar, but caught an unsuspecting hen in its path. The chicken clucked in surprise before flying off into the distance, leaving the other birds in terror. As Bergunnar vanished, Bolverk walked in with a smile on his face. "Hello, Frigga. Stormy weather, eh?" he greeted. "You can go outside and see for yourself," Frigga responded angrily. "So I will," Bolverk replied, still smiling. "The weather is better outside than in, but first, may I ask if you happen to know where Leif is this morning?" "How would I know?" Frigga retorted. "Perhaps you learned about it from someone else," Bolverk suggested. "Well, I don't know, so go check the weather," Frigga snapped back. "Ah, I see it's time we get another cat from Iceland," Bolverk teased, recalling how Frigga's husband had mistreated her pet. This comment managed to calm the angry woman, who continued with her washing without further complaint. "Good morning," Bolverk said goodbye as he left the house in search of Leif. He found Leif hard at work repairing the snake. "I have an idea," Bolverk announced. "Out with it," Leif responded. "Thoughts kept too long tend to hatch into chicks, and men often chase these chickens rather than focusing on the original hens. Well, I suggest taking as many men as you can spare to reinforce Kjartan by sea," Bolverk proposed. "That's strange," Leif said. "I had the same thought this morning while working on this oar. I was going to discuss it with you. Why do you think it's necessary? With the Savages' party possibly larger than we thought, or with the possibility of others joining, I'm worried that the force with Kjartan may not be enough to withstand heavy odds. A small party is not very effective against heavy odds, but a larger one can handle them, especially since Savages are not usually willing to come on and get killed in large numbers," Bolverk explained. Leif agreed with Bolverk's reasoning, and agreed to send him a crew of 32 men in 4 canoes to reinforce Kjartan. While Bolverk gathered his men and prepared canoes with arms and food, Leif instructed the rest to fortify a central point of defence as a last resort if the colonists ever faced overwhelming numbers. In no time, Bolverk and his crew embarked on their mission. Kjartan had always known that a stronghold was necessary, but he had held off on its construction due to the positive relationship between the Norsemen and the natives. That was until a series of misunderstandings and threats from the Savages forced his hand. The fortress was now almost complete. It was a palisade made of stout planks, standing 12 feet tall with narrow slits for arrows on all sides. The inside had a platform for defence, allowing men to throw stones and other missiles over the wall. However, its true strength was in its foundation, a small, isolated rocky mound in the heart of the hamlet. The mound was only 30 feet tall, but its steep sides made it nearly impossible to climb. The area was small, but it was enough to hold the population of the entire village and their cattle. Leif was committed to completing the stronghold as quickly as possible. A large shed was built to protect the women from projectiles, and another was constructed underneath the fortress to hold the livestock. Some of the men made arrows, while others gathered ammunition in the form of heavy stones. The women's shed was stocked with dried provisions and water, with extra supplies of the latter being obtained by daring night sallies near the lake. Thanks to their hard work, the fortress was completed just 8 days after Bolverk's departure. This was timely, for at the time of Bolverk's voyage, the woods were alive with Savages. The Norsemen had been lucky that the Savages did not notice the departure of the canoes, because they were all holding a council of war deep within the woods. They had resolved to attack the white invaders, kill them all, and take their belongings. Leif had neglected to send scouts out for surveillance, eager to complete the fortifications. It was a mistake that almost cost them their lives. When the work was completed, Leif sent Hengler, an expert bowman, to hunt for venison. But within an hour, Hengler was seen running back at full speed with 2 Savages chasing him down. Without a helmet or sword, Leif grabbed his bow and ran to meet Hengler, shouting, "To arms, men!" The Savages stopped in their tracks, quickly fitting arrows to their bows and taking aim. The first arrow grazed Hengler's ear as he darted past, while the second missed completely. Before the Savages could attempt another shot, Leif drew his bow and sent an arrow hurtling towards them. It struck one of the Savages in the thigh, causing him to howl in pain as he pulled the shaft from his wound and fled back into the woods with his companion close behind. Hengler raced into the hamlet, gasping for breath. "Quickly, we must act now. They will surely come for us with an army once those 2 report back to their tribe." "Are they coming towards us?" Leif questioned. Not at the moment, but they will soon advance like a fierce storm once they hear of our presence, Hengler replied. Quick, everyone into the fort, Leif commanded. Hengler, help the women. We must prepare for a battle. Do you think they really mean to attack us? Gunhildr inquired as she stepped forward along with Bergunnar and Frigga. Without a doubt, Leif affirmed. Come, follow Hengler and take shelter in the fort. The arrow in that savage's leg will have sealed our fate. Where are Thorgunnar and Astrid? They are in the dairy, Gunhildr replied. I will fetch them, Leif determined as he headed towards the dairy. Frigga picked up a spear and charged alongside the others. If only I were a man, I'd show those savages not to trifle with us, Leif thought to himself with a wry smile. Peaceable? Hardly, as he rushed to the dairy. But he remained silent, knowing that it was a time for action, not words. Within a few moments, nearly all of the hamlet's inhabitants had sought refuge in the fort. The livestock was moved into the shed beside the rock, and the gate was closed. The men stationed themselves on the battlements, ready to repel any incoming invaders. Hours passed, and the sun sank below the horizon, giving way to the dark of the night. The massive forest that surrounded the fort remained eerily quiet. The tension in the air was palpable as the men stood watch, straining their ears for any sign of the enemy. This is peculiar, Hengler remarked, standing alongside Leif. It's not that strange, Leif countered. In my experience, a surprise attack is never launched during the day. Hengler nodded in understanding. True, but when a group of strong warriors confronts a weaker one, it seems childish to wait and let the advantage slip. Leif smiled tolerantly at him. You have much to learn about warfare, my young friend. A small group with good walls and a stockpile of weapons and provisions can become a formidable force. Hengler looked thoughtful. Perhaps my knowledge of war will improve today, then.